второе занятие с досточтимой Рабиной. Пожалуйста, кому требуется русский перевод, найдите, и если вы впервые присоединились к нам, найдите внизу в меню кнопочку «Перевод», она с глобусом, и там вы можете выбрать русский перевод. Также у нас идет трансляция на YouTube. В YouTube вы можете смотреть только англоязычную трансляцию, без перевода. Вопросы, пожалуйста, задавайте в письменном виде в чат. И вопросы сегодня досточтимой Рабине озвучивает Катя Скай. И, пожалуйста, если досточтимая Рабина попросит вас проявиться, иногда требуется уточнить какой-то вопрос, пожалуйста, нажмите какую-нибудь из кнопок внизу в разделе «Участники». Это может быть синяя ручка, либо может быть галочка, крестик. Так мы сможем вас легче найти в списке участников. Большое спасибо. Так, мы готовы. Начали запись. Venerable, so we are ready.
Okay, we're ready? All right. Let's start with our little prayer and our motivation. Okay. All right. So everybody, hello, happy to see you all, or the ones I can't see, happy to know you all there together. We're going to now talk about, we're going to use Lama Zobarimati's book that came out in English several years ago, one version of it, but the newer version, the better version is now out in English. And the one you guys are using is similar to it, pretty similar. There's a few updates in it, but the new one, but it's okay. Effectively, the one you've got is the same. And it's now, but the new title for it is called, it used to be called How to Help Your Loved Ones Enjoy Death and Go Happily to Their Next Rebirth. Now it's Wisdom Publications called the new one, which is more sober, How to Face Death Without Fear, which is probably a good one to say because everybody's afraid of death, you know. So we're going to use that as a basis of our talks these next, how many weeks, Anastasia? How many weeks have we got? How many weeks have we got?
2.
How many weeks are we doing this talk or just today?
So today is the second session and
already done it. Oh, I forgot. I get confused because I teach in different centers and it all looks the same to me because I've got Buddha in the background. It could be Zurich one morning, could be Australia the next, could be India the next. I forget. Forgive me, I didn't prepare. So we've already done one. I'm so sorry. How embarrassing. Maybe it's my old age. I'm getting Alzheimer's perhaps. I should be preparing for death. Anyway, that's good to remind you in case you weren't here last time. That's what we're discussing. So with this in mind, we're going to do our little prayer, our motivation. Our first 2 lines of this prayer say that we, you know, for those of us who are Buddhist already, it's reminding us of our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings. It's reiterating our refuge, those of us who feel we're already Buddhists. And then the second 2 lines are stating an altruistic purpose. I mean, we'd say, what's our purpose? Why are we together? The Tibetans would say, what's your motivation? What's our purpose? Well, we're going to listen for some tools. It should be practical, you know. It's not just to fill our heads with boring information or exciting information. It's got to be practical. It's like cooking class. So if you're listening to cooking class, you want to go away with at least one recipe. It's exactly the same here. So have it with that in mind. Listen with that in mind. You don't have to take the advice, but it is advice. Okay. For what? Well, specifically death, to get ready for it and to help others, but long term, how to help us develop our amazing potential so that we can become a Buddha, so we can be a benefit to others. That's the plan. Okay. Sangye chadang choke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chernyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok sangye chadang choke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chernyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok. In Russian one time.
Будет Дхарме и Высшем Собрании еще прибежище вплоть до просветления, силу заслуг от практики даяния и других парамид, достанной Будды на благо всех существ.
And then the mandala, yeah, why not? We can do that too, why not? We usually do that first, but never mind, I'll sing that. And that's making an offering to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. So if you don't know the Buddhist cosmological view of the universe, you know, then you just think of all the marvelous things of this world that make people happy. Basically, that's all it is. And you pile up all those in your mind and you imagine offering to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. So say it in Russian. Say it in Russian.
Эту умощенную благовониями, покрытой цветами землю, великую гору меры, 4 континента, солнце, луну, я представляю, как воле Будды подношу. Да насладятся все существа-скитальцы жизнью в этой чистой земле. Идам гуру ратна мандала камнири атаями.
So we imagine the Buddha happily accepts our offering. Okay, let's go. So I don't remember what we talked about last week, so someone had better remind me. This shows if you've done any homework or not. Tell me what we talked about last week. Anybody? Probably it was getting ready for death in terms of living our life appropriately. Was that right, people? Anybody remember? Yes, it was. Okay, good, Andre. So that's, I mean, so in other words, okay, there's two things, and Rinpoche makes this very clear in this book. So again, remembering the main point Rinpoche makes, the main point, the essential point he says, if you want to help anybody during this life, they need you most at the time of death. So of course, this is totally surprising to us. Usually it's the end of the life. I mean, look at all the old people's homes. I don't know about in Russia, but so many countries, old people's homes are these very, very unhappy, sad, depressing places where old people are turned into vegetables, you know, drugged out of their brains, watching television all day, waiting for them to die. I mean, it's very, very, very depressing. And it indicates our view, you know, it indicates the view of the materialist world with respect to us, the philosophical view, you know. And I always remember, I mean, I was brought up a Catholic, okay, and I was in love with God, and I was in love with Our Lady and the saints and all these people. It had a deep meaning for me, you know. I mean, I was a naughty girl, but it was inside me. And I know we had an old auntie who was a nun, and I remember we'd go to the hospital. Two different people who both old nuns died in the hospital where the old nuns died. Well, all I can tell you was that they are totally beautiful. They were elegant, they were clean, they had beautiful, I mean, of course, I liked the statues of Our Lady and the saints, but they were immaculate, really peaceful, sweet experience, sweet feeling, all the other kind nuns taking care of all the old nuns. I really remember it so vividly. It was nothing like what the feeling you have of a hospital busy with noise, and I'm not criticizing nurses and doctors or hospitals, but I'll never forget it. It was very powerful, very serene, you know. Well, that's the exact atmosphere. So of course, because those nuns, they're driven by the philosophical view that they're old nuns, they're helping them die well so they can go to heaven with God. Well, I mean, that's not a bad view, I promise you. That's a pretty good view. Helps you at least die peacefully. I remember, so okay, there are two things. There are two things in the book. One is just the practical background to how to listen, you know, to take on board the Buddhist teachings about impermanence and live our lives within that framework, recognizing the main impermanence is the one at some point I won't exist. At some point I'll be dead. So with that future view in mind, you know, being prepared to live your life. And once you begin to live like that, within the view of impermanence, everything changes. Already the Lamas all say, if you have a realization of impermanence, a sincere recognition, you know, that a sincere recognition that you're not going to be here forever, that you're an impermanent being, that you're living within the reality of impermanence, your whole approach to life completely changes. Because right now, that's arguing with right now the view which is based in fear, that can't stand change, that clings on to things, that lives in denial of death. I mean, this we think you know, the death is fearful. It's the exact opposite. Death is fearful for us because we don't want to know about it, because we're scared of not being here. So by changing our mind, by understanding impermanence, and that's one of Buddha's fundamental teachings, this we know, then you live your life completely differently. And then on the basis of understanding karma, which is this crucial view, you know, this Buddha's view of the universe, such that there are trillions of living beings, trillions of sentient beings, all their minds are beginningless and endless, and every millisecond of what we think and do and say programs our mind, sows seeds in our mind that produce our own future. There's no talk in Buddhism about God rewarding you and bringing you to heaven. No discussion like that. We produce our own reality. So the view of impermanence, living your life like this, and then with the view of karma, what do you think you'd become like? You'd be a marvelous human being. You'd be much more easygoing. You'd be more flexible. You'd be less fearful. You'd be less up and down. You'd be less attached, less angry, less neurotic, less grasping. And you be more ethical because you know perfectly well at the time of death, and we're going to get into this information, the actual process of death, especially from the Vajrayana point of view, you know that at that time, exactly at that time, about before you stop breathing, the karmic seed that will be the one that will determine your future life. This is a very technical process, you know. There's no judgment or reward involved. There's no one out there judging and waiting to send you somewhere. There's no view like that. But the karmic seed that is the one that is most strong, and the one we want is a strong, intentional karmic seed of non-harming, in particular non-killing, in particular practice in the framework of living in vows. That's the karmic seed we want to be triggered at the time we stop breathing, about before then, because that is the one, in our case, not more than a few weeks before we found our way to our present mother's little fallopian tube, where it joined the egg and sperm of mummy and daddy, assuming we were conceived in the old-fashioned way. The seed that was triggered was just before we stopped breathing, and we have to deduce, and this is the point, that we must have been relatively peaceful. We could have been an ant or a dog, whatever. It doesn't have to mean we were a human, but our mind must have been ready, and one of those karmic seed was triggered. And the condition, we're going to go into this today, the external condition, the condition that allows that seed to be nourished is a peaceful, quiet, peaceful, holy, devoted condition. And that was I remember those Catholic nuns where they died, you know. And I remember thinking as a little girl, if I'm going to die, we'd like to die like here. Thank you very much. Well, you're appreciated, you're respected, people love you, they look after you, they treasure you. They weren't all just drugged out of their brains with television blasting all day, you know. It's very, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. I don't know if it's the same now, but that was back in the 1950s, you know. That's the way to die. So, well, let's discuss this and the logic for why, not just to make everybody think, oh, isn't that nice? There's a logic to it all. There's a logic to it, you know. So the first thing is live your life in the framework of impermanence and the law of karma. Then you got all the tools. Then whether you die today or in 50 years, you're ready, baby, because they're the tools you need to use. You prepare your mind by recognizing impermanence, by living in the reality of it. And this itself, this is one of the first realizations in the path. But oh my goodness, we're nowhere near it. You know, this is the reason why we suffer. This is why we suffer when things change. I mean, this is why one of the reasons why people are suffering now, right now in Russia. I'm reading all the news, you know, about all these, you know, political, you know, all these, never mind political, but these demonstrations of people getting beaten up and thrown into jail. And that Mr. Fellow who's now given us 2-year sentence or something. You know, we're freaking out, yes, because it's violent, but the real reason we're freaking out because, okay, and that's another whole discussion, but one of the reasons we're freaking out because things are changing. We can't cope with change. We don't like change, you know, and that's one of the delusions in the mind. We cling to things as being solid, permanent. This is a very gross delusion. It's underpinned by the root delusion that clings to things as having an inherent nature, but it's also very linked to the view of cause and effect, because, you know, when the things are permanent, unchanging, there's no view of cause and effect. So because in this world, of course, and probably in Russia, the vast majority of Russians don't have a view of karma. A few Buddhists might, you know, but unless it's taught in the Russian Orthodox Church, I don't think so. So then, of course, we're going to have all these different interpretations. And one of the reasons we suffer because we don't like change. Of course, the other reason we suffer, and this is a big one, this is the one too. As Amazova says, you know, in one of the chapters in the earlier part of the book, death is not fearful. Death itself is not fearful. It's a natural thing that occurs. But because we are so living in denial of it, first because we don't want to change and can't bear the thought of me not existing, it's too terrifying for us. But the real reason in terms of which delusion in the mind is the main source of the suffering, it is called attachment. So the connecting to grasping, the connection between attachment and grasping at permanence is very strong, you know. This is in daily life. I might have used the example all the time of one Hollywood actress, and I like a lot, Nicole Kidman, when she was with Tom Cruise. And I read an interview with her 20 years ago when she was with him. And she said at the end of the interview, this is an example, we will be together until we are 80. Well, if you read the gossip papers like I do, you know that he ran off with Penelope Cruz. He left her for a younger version. I'm just joking, but the point is, you know, that's two things. One, because life is delicious right now, whether it's in terms of death or your husband leaving you, it's the same problem in the mind. It's grasping at things as permanent. Permanent meaning unchanging. Not maybe, yeah, but sort of like forever as well. So that was so clear. In other words, why did she think for sure we will be together until we're 80? Why do we think For sure, I'm 27 now. I've got another 60 years to live it later. I've got another 67 years to live or something. Why do we have that kind of certainty? Because of attachment. That's why, because attachment. Because everything is delicious now. If your life is, if you're 27 and your life is delicious, or you're married to your beloved and you think you're going to be here to get together till you're 80, it's because the delicious thing is happening. Attachment is frantically delighted to have the delicious thing, and then because attachment can't stand the thought of bad things, then we plonk another lie on top and we say, we will be together until we are 80. I will live until I'm 80. So of course, in terms of life, it's because, oh, I'm young, I'm healthy. You think that's the main cause of dying, of being, living till an old age. Just not true, not from the Buddha's perspective. So getting in touch with the reality of impermanence. Buddha is not a creator. He didn't make up the concept of impermanence and then copyright it. What a silly idea. All he's done, like a good scientist, is observe reality. So he says, you've got to be in touch with reality, folks, because why you suffer, baby, is because you're not in touch with reality. So the other reason we suffer, when the husband leaves us, when you get old, when you get sick, or when there's suddenly now violence all around you, is because of attachment. Because when attachment doesn't get what it wants, attachment is junkie in us that only wants the nice things. So as long as Nicole was getting all the nice things, and I'm not being rude about the woman, I love her, she's lovely, was such a powerful example. We all think like this. Because everything was lovely, that life was like this bubble, the husband, the children, the life, they were in love with each other. So because it was delicious, which means because attachment was getting what it wants, that's the point. Because attachment, hang on a minute.
Everything is ready, and we just.
Sorry, I've got to do something. Please forgive me. Wait. Okay. So because attachment, when it gets what it wants, when everything's lovely, we dump permanence onto it, because attachment. So that's the real problem. I think that's more than the permanent one. It's because if attachment's getting what it wants, which means everything's lovely, you're young, you're healthy, life looks like all ahead of you, you're all excited, looking forward to your life, you've got the beloved husband, whatever the scenario might be, because attachment's getting what it wants, which is to have the nice feelings, we just cannot stand the thought of that ever changing. That's the logic of it. That's the analysis. And so the other reason we suffer terribly because of death is because we have different philosophical views. I mean, this is something we don't ever think about. The Buddha's key point across the board is that we suffer because the main cause, this is quite literal for the Buddha, we suffer because our mind is full of misconceptions. And these misconceptions were not taught by our mother. We came born with them. We came into this life programmed with them. The view of attachment, the view of anger, the view of permanence, these are all programmed misconceptions. And then the philosophical views that Buddha would very calmly and very politely argue with. He argues with the view that you're created by a superior being. He argues with the view that your mind is the brain. He argues with the view that you began in your mother's womb and that they're your creator. He's not being fundamentalist. He's not being sectarian. He's got his view. So it's kind of clear, according to the view you have in your mind, and the trouble is most of us don't even know we have a view. We just think what we think is real. So we never analyze. But, one of my friends who worked in the hospice movement, I might have mentioned this last time. She worked in the hospice movement a long time ago, 40 years ago in California. She said it was a given among all her colleagues that most people die with fear, but the only ones she noticed who didn't die with fear were those who had a spiritual path. And probably that was because that's mostly Christians then. So because and this is very logical, this is a very simple point. If you brought up with the view of materialism and it's in your bones, everyone around you thinks it's just what the world accepts, you just take it as a given. You don't question it. So you believe that when you die, you will fall into a black hole and you'll disappear, or whatever you think. So obviously, I think it's pretty reasonable to be scared of that. That's a reasonable reason to have fear, But if you're a Christian, for example, just I say, back these people 40 years ago in California, my friend, Because the ones who did have a sincere viewpoint, they had a view that when they die, they'll go to heaven. So it's really logical they wouldn't suffer so much, because what they're preoccupied with at their time of dying is getting ready to go see God. I think you'd be very excited to die. The greatest Christians and the best Muslims, the ones who have the greatest faith in a creator, would be blissed out to die because they can't wait to go to see God. That's completely reasonable. Well, that's very skillful, isn't it? I'd rather die like that. At least your mind's happy. If your mind is happy and virtuous, then at least a decent, virtuous karmic seed can be triggered, will give you a decent future life. It might not be what you expect, but from the Buddhist perspective, you'll at least get a decent human body, because your own mind determines. You are the boss. We are the boss, you know. It's very shocking to us. We don't think so. So we're scared right now. We have fear. And this is why we have to understand now, talking about all what's going on in Russia. I read in the newspapers and whatever's going on in Russia, you know, many things going on in Russia, but this is one thing that's going on in Russia because all the newspapers talk about it, isn't it? I mean, the people in some outer edge of Siberia who don't have television have no idea what's going on in Moscow. So this is not real for them. So it's only those of you who are noticing this and maybe have some views about politics, you know, are worried about it. So what's the Buddhist explanation? What's the Buddhist way to deal with this? And this is exactly the same as the Buddhist way to deal with death. You know, we suffer because our attachment isn't getting what it wants. Now, if you're a total fan of, let's say, the other side, whichever side you've got, I don't care, but you're a total fan of the opposite side, you'll be delighted what's going on. You'll be so happy all these wretched troublemakers are going to prison. You'll be so happy. So it depends on your view, you know. It was what Buddha said. It depends on your view in your head. Then the other one is, we've got to have, if you try to be Buddhist, this is what we're discussing in these talks. If we've got the Buddhist view, what's the Buddhist view? Well, first of all, whatever's in front of you, this is related to emptiness. This is what Lama Zopa says. Whatever we experience, second by second, moment by moment, whatever's in front of us, whatever appears, that's your own karmic appearance. So this is the literal explanation. This is the literal consequence of the view of karma. It is this natural law that determines all the seeds in our mind that we've planted. At some point, when they meet the appropriate conditions, they're going to ripen. So they're going to ripen. This is where death is important. They're going to ripen as a type of rebirth. And that's the big one we're going to discuss. That's the big change we're trying to discuss. What to make sure we do get one of our virtuous karmic seeds in our own personal bank vaults will be triggered before we stop breathing, so we can guarantee we'll get another decent human birth, meet the Dalai Lama, meet the teachings, and keep on practicing our path. That's the ideal. But in terms of daily life and thinking about what goes on in front of you and seeing all these dramas happening and all the violence or whatever's happening, that's your karmic appearance. First of all, this is the biggest shock to us, because how do we experience it? We read the papers, we look at the television, we see the iPad, and we're shocked. How dare all this happen? Look at this terrible violence. Look at all this suffering. And I'm not being cynical here, whether you're Tibetan and it's happening in Tibet at the hands of the Chinese communists, or whether it's in any country, whether you like, whatever, whether your husband who's violent to you, whatever it is, or indeed, if what your karmic appearance is peaceful and lovely. Maybe it's something living in like a little village in the bottom end of Siberia, and it's a sunny day, or maybe not today, it's not going to be sunny, the other part of the world, the other time of the year, it's a sunny day and your roses are growing, that's your karmic appearance. You're feeling very content and very fulfilled. So what's everybody's individual experience is not the same. So whatever we experience, that's the fruit of our past karma. Even just that view, which is so shocking for us, is a very profound method to use to interpret what's going on and to own it and realize, okay, this is due to my own past violence that I'm right now seeing violence. Even more so if it's happening to you, but even if you're just seeing it, that's the karmic result of your past abusive language, for example, your past abuse 47 lives ago maybe, but you're now seeing violence. You're being surrounded in the environment by violence. This is directly the result of your past actions. So that's the first interpretation. That's the first interpretation. Right there, you own it. Karma, they use the example of seeds and fruits. Well, your life is your garden, okay? And you know with your garden, with the law of botany, whatever's in your garden. You don't get shocked by it when the weeds start coming. Oh my God, I can't believe these weeds. Where are they coming from? Who put weeds in my garden? This is so shocking. I cannot bear weeds. Excuse me, baby, it's your garden, so they're your weeds. You own them. That's a very different approach, because then you think, what can I do to fix it? So here right now, in terms of what you're seeing in front of you, people being violent, people being imprisoned, let's say, The first attitude in the wisdom wing, using Buddha's views, is this is your karmic appearance. This is the result of my, and then the learning is the result of my past actions. And then the learning is, it's a result of their past actions. Oh my goodness, I better learn from this. Conclusion, stop killing, stop harming, stop abusing, stop lying, stop bad-mouthing, stop harming sentient beings. That's the action point. Then you can have compassion. That's the compassion wing. And if there is something you can do to stop it, please do it. But 99.9% of the time, you know, you can't walk up to those policemen. You can't walk up to your prime minister. Or you can't walk up and say, would you please kindly stop all this nonsense? You know you can't do that. So then what do? When you can't change something, you keep having compassion. You realize that all these people are suffering as a result of their own past actions. This is the Buddhist interpretation. I mean, if you're a Buddhist, this is what Buddha says. You don't have to like it, but if you say you're a Buddhist, it's a bit contradictory if you don't like it. Make up your mind. That's how you interpret it. Then if you can, so first of all, you learn from it and you increase your wish not to kill, lie, steal, harm, because there's a consequence right in front of you. Second, you now have compassion. What can I do to help? And who do you have compassion for now? Well, if you're a really sincere Buddhist like the Bodhisattvas, you'll have compassion for the both sides. Not just one, not just your group, both. One, there are some people being beaten up. That's due because they've beaten up in the past. And two, those are beating now will get beaten up in the future. And so it keeps going until we understand the law of cause and effect. This is the Buddhist interpretation. It's up to you to decide to use it. Then you get out there and act if you can. If you feel it's worthwhile, if you do feel it's worthwhile to join the demonstrations because you really feel change is necessary, then you take the risks, just like the Tibetans do. They get out there, you know, the Tibetans in Tibet and get out there and they get murdered or they get thrown into prison for 27 years. They feel that making trouble is bringing the trouble to the surface and then change can come. That's really typical. I mean, look at all the stuff that's going on in the United States all the time around, especially around racism. And now all these, you know, I always joke and say they finally discovered a new group of people who are the cause of all the problem. They're called white men. It's all right, you men, don't worry. I'm not being sarcastic. We were all white men at some point. We've always had other groups before because the norm has always been white and male, isn't it? That's the default view of normal. So the groups have always been female or black or Muslim or other. There's always other. Suddenly the group they're now discovering in the United States. Finally, you can see people realizing it. All these white supremacists, you know, and they happen to be white male mostly. It's very fascinating. There's a new group of people called white men. It's very fascinating. Anyway, that's just my side comment. So we suffer because of attachment. We suffer because we got wrong views, Buddha says. He's not being fundamentalist because we don't believe, we have no view of cause and effect. And this is the major one. I mean, the Bodhisattvas have such compassion for us. Forget about because we don't realize emptiness, the root problem, but because we don't have any view of cause and effect. We have no sense that what we experience is the fruit of our actions. This is so profound as a view, you know, as a philosophy. And that view can completely change us as well. So get yourself ready by living in impermanence, by practicing ethics, living in your vows, purifying every day, thinking about impermanence every day, recognizing those points. Death is definite. The time of it is not definite. And at the time of death, when it comes, and I don't know when, the only thing that's helpful to me is the virtuous calming seeds in my mind. That's it. It's very precise. It's very clear. It's very technical. So if the only thing that helps in your mind at the time you start to die is the virtuous seeds in your mind, you can't rely on all the ones you've planted in the past to pop up. You've got to start practicing more virtue now. And by doing that, one, you plant new seeds, but two, you nourish the previous virtuous seeds. If you do your weeding every day, then you'll guarantee the flowers can keep growing. So you do your, as well as that, you do your purification. So you stop sowing more negative seeds, which is you stop killing and stealing and lying. You then purify the ones you've already planted, and you practice lots of virtues, put in lots of flowers and herbs. So when death does come, you'll be ready. It's very simple. And then death will be a very blissful experience. I might have mentioned that last week. Death will be a very blissful experience. I can't remember if I said that to you last week. I'll repeat it if I did. That's really the point. So when we get through the death process, we'll describe that. Okay. So now there's two things. The second thing is how to understand the death process itself. To understand the death process itself. Andre or somebody, or Diana, do you remember? Last week, did I talk about, I don't think it was this group. God, I wish I remembered. I should have looked at my previous teaching. I'm so sorry. Never mind. We'll keep repeating anyway. So, okay. So then the first part of the book gives you all the background about karma. Then there's, and the mind and attachment gets us ready. And then there's a section on sort of the more technical ones. What happens at the time of death? What are the components of a person? What is the process itself? And one of those, and there's two parts. One is the 12 links of dependent arising, which is Buddha's teaching on how we create lifetime after lifetime after lifetime every single day. The other thing is, and this is Rinpoche's chapter, these 12 links play a very particular role at the time of death. So there's that to understand, which we'll go through. And then there's the 8 stages of death, which is from the Vajrayana teachings, which is the technical explanation of the deconstruction, the gradual deconstruction of the components of the person. So we'll mention both of these. They're chapters in your book, you've got those. But the other aspect, this book, of course, the book has to be addressed to somebody. Rinpoche is not just talking to everyone. So the whole book is very specifically addressed to helping your loved ones, because that's the best way to help someone else die. But obviously, by implication, you're helping yourself die, aren't you? I mean, it's obvious. It's all teachings that you can put into practice. Helping your loved ones. So one of the things he talks about when he starts talking about the death is in different stages, what to do the weeks and months before death. What to do the days before death, what to do the hours before death, what to do when the breath stops, what to do when the mind leaves. There's different stages, chronological, So so the next piece, and this is in what I mentioned about those Catholic nuns where they died. This is a really major point, because whether it's your mouse, a cat, your baby or your grandmother or your beloved sister, whoever, whatever state of senility they're in, or whether, however conscious they are, it's pretty much the same. They need to have a really conducive environment. And a conducive environment, like for those nuns, was peaceful, clean, beautiful. Okay, if you're unconscious, you can't tell if the place is dirty. But one of the things when you look into, I mean, I'm not being critical about doctors and hospitals and nurses, but in a way, that's about the worst place to die. Because it's so noisy. The noise is incredible. And they all talk about how, and Rinpoche mentions this, as your mind's getting more subtle, as you're going through these 8 stages of death, your mind gets incredibly sensitive. The tiniest noise can be beyond distressing for you. So, I mean, hospitals must be so awful. And with their respect, all these kind people who work there, it's about the worst place to die, The noise, the shouting, the machines, the banging of doors, other people's emotion, overwhelming. What you need ideally is one place. It's beautiful, peaceful, like those places where those nuns died, or like a friend of mine recently, a few years ago, one of my friends, a nun, Trisha, in India. She's English, and she lived there for like 60 years, and she was my age. We joked about how we were both born in the year of the monkey, So there she was dying. She was in Australia visiting family, and she felt sick and went to the hospital, and she had this really virulent cancer. You'll be dead in a couple of months. So she checked with Lama Zopa what to do, and he said, you're going to die, so you might as well stay in Australia. No point in trying to get better. So she found this really beautiful place. It was near our centre called Chenrezig Institute, Lama Zopa Centre there in the bush in Queensland, in the north. It's like Australia's Florida, except it's in the northern part of the country, because we're on the other side of the world, aren't we? So anyway, there's this place next door to Chenrezig Institute that was beautiful. It looked like Bali. Had these beautiful views and hills and spacious and lovely rooms. She chose to go there because it was so beautiful. So when she was sick and, half asleep and in her bed, you open your eyes, everything is lovely. I mean, we have senses, enhance them. I mean, you wake up in a sick room with smells and dirty and noise and junk everywhere and darkness. How distressing for the mind. The mind of the dying person needs to be as spacious as possible. And the other one is make it beautiful. Only have what's necessary in the room. If there are, let's say it's a Buddhist who's dying. You have Buddhist images where if they open their eyes, they see Buddhist images, their guru, the Buddha. You have to know what they want and you do it exactly to their taste, because when the senses are very powerful. And in this chapters where Rinpoche starts giving the practices to do, they're all in the back of the book, like 87, all numbered, so many practices. Of course, you can just do 1 or 2, it's your choice. But the very first ones, they're all divided into what to see, what to hear, what to touch. There's so many practices right there because the senses are powerful. Whatever the senses experience, leave an imprint in the mind. So your beloved, if they're, they're Buddhist, a friend of mine dying, slowly, weeks and months dying, she's lying in bed. Right there on the front of her in the wall are the pictures of Lama Zopa, her guru, is the picture of Buddha. So even though she's half asleep, she's seeing these images. And this is the point. From the Buddha's point of view, everything any sentient being sees, hears, touches, especially these two, are so powerful. It leaves an impression in the mind. One Lama said it's like shooting a movie all day. Everything gets stored in your memory. This is not even the karmic idea. It was just stored as memories. So everything that you see and hear connect. And then when you see or hear these again, you recognize them. And that'll mean next life as well. So you want in the mouse's mind, your grandma's mind, the baby's mind, you want these imprints. So you put these images, then so maybe the sight is gone, but sound is even more powerful. People can be in a coma and can hear things. So this is so powerful. And one of the best ways you can help the ant, the dog, your sad old grandma, have mantras playing very quietly next to them day and night. You couldn't possibly do anything better for them. Not possible. Your dog, I mean, this is the exact same for your dog. We rush off to our vet, and our poor old vets, they spend half their time killing animals these days. No, don't rush off and kill your cat, kill your dog. Make it peaceful, put it in a very quiet place. Your dog adores you. It feels safe. It feels secure. And you let it hear mantra. That's it. And it'll die peacefully. And because its mind is peaceful, it's not feeling stressed, then its mind is quiet. Those sounds have an impression in the mind, leave an imprint, and they can help nourish a virtuous karmic seed. Your little doggy will get a human body and meet the Buddha. If your mummy's a Christian, check out what your husband, loved one's like. Don't force Buddhism onto them, and don't force Christianity or something onto them. So if your mummy's a Catholic or a Christian, put the images that she loves there, When she opens her eyes out of her sleep, she'll see the images, and it'll make her peaceful right there. But if she opens her eyes and it's dark and dingy and bottles everywhere, how distressing, This is such a powerful point. Make the place beautiful, make it conducive for the mind to be peaceful. And this is the point. When the mind is peaceful, that encourages virtuous karmic seeds to be triggered. If the mind is distressed, that can only trigger non-virtuous karmic seeds. This is a technical point. It's not blame or punishment. It's just how it is, So then it's all these different practices, what to see, what to hear, what to touch, like having mantras. I mean, as Catholics, we'd have a thing called a scapula. Don't know if you Russian Orthodox people have that. Like a little kind of thing that you hang around your neck, or you put it in, and it's got prayers and special prayers inside it. And you have that, you're touching. I know when my grandmother died, we had things like this, very similar. Or you can have prayers and mantras there, or you can have a blessing string around their neck, which has been blessed by the Buddhas. You can have them touching a prayer wheel. You can have a text on their crown. Many things you can do. All these practices are all there, and they're all listed in the back of the book. You can choose any or all of these, up to you, So things to touch, things to listen to, things to touch, to hear, to see. Some mantras, Rinpoche says, there's one mantra called just by seeing. That's what its name is. It blesses the mind. Rinpoche loves all these mantras. He finds mantras that nobody else in the world has found. He loves his mantras. All these things, to what to do the weeks and months before. Then the time, when the time gets closer, the days before. And it's interesting, I think, I speak to many people who work with the dying, and there's people in the West, with the materialist views, there's the strong sense that people know when you're going to die. Oh, your grandma's going to die today, you better come to the hospital. People often say like this, and it's interesting. So you do all the same things, but you've got to adjust it to the person's needs, and be very gentle and quiet. The other thing that's so important, according to Rinpoche's instructions, is to keep the room beautiful and conducive. You don't just have people coming in and out, shouting and yelling, and especially if your grandma's, whether she's in a coma or not. If she's in a coma, she can still be distressed by this. She can be aware of it. I'm going to discuss this more. So you'd make sure that if you're in charge of the process. Now, of course, if you're not in charge, if you're just, you're just one of the sisters and you have no control over what goes on, you can't take most of this advice. The assumption in this book is that the person reading it is the person who's in charge of the process. And if you're not in charge of it, at least you can try to have some influence. So, you know, you keep the troublemakers out. You keep the one, even let's say your grandmother, she's particularly attached to one person. And if she sees her, she gets really distressed and clingy and unhappy. That's not good for your grandmother. The thing is to make it as conducive as possible for your grandma or whoever it is to be peaceful. So don't surround them by things of attachment. Don't surround them by their pets and their cats and their dogs and their, you know, and make it noisy and busy. That just so distresses their mind, you know. As Rinpoche says, the only sounds should be the sounds of prayers or mantras, or you know, no just unnecessary talking. It doesn't mean to make it kind of rigid and holy, but that feeling I saw when I was little, as a little girl, I vividly remember it. That the feeling that was there was peaceful, minding their own business. No one was raging on and chatting away and shouting and yelling and running up and down the corridors. There was no, you know, it was peaceful. Peaceful. This is especially powerful at death because the mind is incredibly sensitive to the tiniest distressing sound especially when you're getting closer to death. Has to be peaceful, you know, because the mind's getting more subtle. Then that encourages virtue. And Rinpoche talks about, when he talks about if you die with peaceful mind, all the indications are, they say the experience for the dying person is literally joyful. Their mind is joyful. If negative karma has been triggered, the mind is incredibly distressed because you can see your future life coming as your mind gets more subtle. It can be like you're freaking out completely. He talks about that. So prepare your life by living properly yourself. Living in impermanence, abiding by the laws of karma, being ethical, and remembering death can come at any time. That's you to be ready. Now, to help others, you can't force them to do that. But your job, the weeks and months before, the days before, the hours before, to know as much as you have learned in order to help your loved ones. Cat, dog, baby, grandma, whoever it might be. And the bottom line for all of them is to make it peaceful, quiet, so virtuous karmic seeds can be triggered. That's the logical reason. That's the logical reason. It's a technical point. So let's talk about the 8 stages of death. We'll go to that, okay? So generally speaking, when the lamas teach it, they don't take individual experiences and say, well, some people it could be 5 hours and some people it could be 1. They just generally just teach it typically a couple of hours. It starts a couple of hours before you stop breathing. But it can be a lot longer for some people and, of course, a lot quicker for other people. So in other words, if you die a violent death, these 8 stages can happen super quick, you know, or it can take up to several hours. These 8 stages, this is from the Vajrayana point of view, the Vajrayana model of the universe. So let's describe that. I'm sure we've discussed it before, but we'll describe it again. So as far as the Vajrayana model of the universe is concerned, there are trillions and trillions and trillions of sentient beings, of minds, consciousnesses, these rivers of mental moments that go back and back and back into the past and future into the future. It's just the way it is. That's Buddha's teaching. Second, these minds, okay, the death process is described. The death process, there's mind and then there's matter. That's really the nature of the universe. There's physical matter, and these physical matter are made of the 4 elements. That's still how they talk. We used to talk about that 600 years ago in our culture, in the Western culture, but not anymore. We talk about all the other elements, don't we? This is still the view in Buddhism. It's probably similar to the Chinese view, the Ayurvedic system, or the Chinese system, you know. We've got 4 elements. The physical matter, the physical universe is made of the 4 elements. And then there are minds. Now, what's interesting, as His Holiness says in one of his commentaries on the death process, all minds are inextricably linked to their own set of the 4 elements. This is just how things are. So the death process is described in terms of the gradual deconstruction of the grosser level of consciousness and the gross physical body, which of course is this bag of bones right here. And they are inextricably linked. You've got eye consciousness. How can you have eye consciousness? And remember, consciousness is not referring to the eyeball. Consciousness by definition is mind and therefore not physical. So eye consciousness, of course you can't have eye consciousness if you haven't got an eyeball and all the bits and pieces working nicely. You can't can't have tactile consciousness without the nerves. You can't have tongue consciousness. So there's obviously those levels of mind are the grossest, and they exist interdependently and inextricably linked with the gross physical body. Now, the first 4 stages of death are the deconstruction of those components. And when you've stopped breathing, now that is when you're ready for the body bag. That's when you're ready. That's called death in the materialist scientific world. But you're not dead yet. That's just the gross consciousness that ceased and the gross physicality. And this process, by the way, is exactly the same process that occurs every time you go to sleep. That's why the greatest yogis, there's a chapter in the book. I'm sure, did I not read you from that chapter? Diana, did I read the chapter called Death is What the Yogis Have Been Waiting For? Do you remember that? Diana? No or yes, Diana? Just tell me, do you remember it? No. You, Andre, do you remember me talking about that? Andre, he's gone. Okay, never mind. Astasia, you don't think so? Okay, I must have been somewhere else I talked about it. Okay, never mind. We'll go through this. It's very helpful. And for you people, especially for you people who are practitioners and you've got a highest yoga tantra practice, or if you're thinking of having a highest yoga tantra practice, this is a really major, this is the essential method to prepare yourself for death. In this chapter, Rinpoche talks about how death is what the yogis have been waiting for, because what they practiced in their meditation, in their sadhanas, which are constructed exactly appropriately, you incorporate the death process with your sadhana practice, and you train going through these 8 stages of deconstruction, combining that with the dissolution of the deity into you, and then you transform death into the Dharmakaya, Bardo into the Sambhogakaya, rebirth into the Nirmanakaya. We'll discuss that later. So, the first stages of death are the earth element, the 4 elements cease, and then the different levels of the sensory consciousnesses cease, but also certain capacity for mental consciousness as well, even though mental consciousness is considered to be subtle. So then once you've stopped breathing, now what's left is your subtle consciousness and your subtle body. What is that? Well, the components of your subtle mind are basically your mental states. They're much subtler than the sensory. We can access them at this level, but only at a very gross level. So they begin to deconstruct, but at the same time, the physical energy, and this is the crucial piece to understand, the physical body, they call it, the physical components of the subtle physical components are a system of 72,000 subtle channels, like a subtle nervous system throughout the entire body. There's a central channel that starts at the back of your head. If your spine went all the way, it would start there, just in front. It goes all the way and ends at the tip of the penis for the boys and the end of the cervix for the girls. Then you've got 2 side channels that begin at the nostrils and go up, and then they go down either side of the central channel all the way and end at the same place. Then you have all these other of the 72,000 channels all around the body, a big, very messy. But coursing through all those channels are all these different wind energies or air energy or prana in Sanskrit. And this is the basis of the Tibetan medical system. The understanding of the Tibetan medical system is completely based on the Vajrayana. And this is, they study 12, 14 years, all these different wind energies, because this is similar to the Chinese one, isn't it? Similar, this idea of the earth, all the 4 elements. So they understand this intimately. And now, coursing through all those channels, connected to those wind energies, inextricably connected, are all your different states of mind, attachment and anger and love and jealousy and kindness and compassion. This is literally how it is. And it's a very sophisticated model. Clearly, it's not neuroscience. It's another whole model, isn't it? So your Tibetan doctor, you go to she and she'll feel your pulses, and she'll feel exactly the imbalance of that particular wind, and she knows it's connected to your attachment. That's why you're having panic attacks. So she can give you the herbal medicine that calms down the wind energy, which impacts upon the attachment mind and calms it down. So they've got the subtle wind energies, and then the subtle, all the states of mind that are connected to those winds. And then the third component you have is called the Kundalini, these drops in Tigle in Tibetan, or Kundalini in Sanskrit, and these subtle red and white drops. So Lama Zopa talks about how they predominate. The white one predominates at the crown chakra. And it's the source of the capacity of the human body to experience bliss, joy, pleasure. And then you've got the red Kundalini. It predominates at the navel chakra, which is, you've got various chakras. Chakras are just this coming together of various of these channels, all constricted and knotted together at various points. There's nothing holy about a chakra. People go on about chakras. It's the constriction of all your channels. There's a bunch constricted here at the crown, brow, throat, about where the Adam's apple is. If you can, most boys can, around about there, you know. Then your heart, navel, just below the navel, and then 3 along the outside of the penis for the boys, on the inside of the penis, or internally 3. They're called secret chakras. 3 internally for the female in the central channel. So there's this constriction of these channels at all those different spots. So the red Kundalini, the white Kundalini predominates here, the crown chakra, and then the red Kundalini predominates at the navel chakra. And that's the source of the capacity of the human body to experience heat. So the Tibetan medical system is based upon this Vajrayana model, you know. It's very technical. It's highly technical. It's not hippie, trippy, spiritual, blah, blah, mystical. It's technical. The way they talk about it in the West and some of those stupid books is so grotesque, you know, it's just so silly. Just vague, stupid nonsense, how people talk about all this stuff, you know. It's highly technical. As Lama Yeshe says, Tantra is highly technical. So then you've got, so gradually the first 4, they deconstruct, cease, your senses cease, the earth element ceases, the water element ceases, the air element ceases, you stop breathing. And then the white goes down, the red stops, and they keep coming all to the central channel, and everything deconstructs from downwards and upwards until eventually all there is left is the very subtle consciousness, or extremely subtle consciousness, or known generally as the clear light consciousness. This is the subtlest level of your conscious being. And it is inextricably linked with the subtlest level of your physical energy, the winds, a subtle wind. These are inextricably linked, one entity, you know. And also all the karmic imprints of anything you've ever said and done and thought since beginningless time that hasn't yet ripened as your experiences is all imprinted in this consciousness. So when that and so that they are all contained at the heart chakra in what's called this indestructible drop. And that indestructible drop, like a tiny, tiny bean or a seed, red at the top and white at the bottom, that's made up of the red and the white, a subtle red and white energy of the egg and the sperm of the parents. And that's at the time of conception, your consciousness left the body, went to the intermediate state, and then when mummy and daddy hopped into bed, your consciousness ran like a magnet and entered into that indestructible drop, the red and the white seed from the subtler level of the egg and the sperm. And that's when you began in your mother's womb, in the fallopian tube probably. That was the time of conception. So then that's the first moment of you. And where you begin is right here at the heart chakra, that indestructible drop where you're very subtle minded. And then as you develop in the fetus, you start to grow from there, you know. And the death process is the gradual deconstruction of all these components, all the way back to the very subtle consciousness linked with the very subtle wind in that indestructible drop. And when that indestructible drop opens, that's death. And that can be 3 days after you've stopped breathing. And then that second, you then reverse the process and go into the intermediate state, which is just like a dream state. And then eventually when mummy and daddy hop into bed, and I don't know how it goes on now with eggs and sperms in Petri dishes, there's different discussions about this now. They're all talking about it, the Buddhists, you know, whether the mind goes then or whether it waits till it gets into the womb, that they all have different discussions. So let's go through that process, okay? But maybe before we do, it's now 1 hour. Why don't you ask me some questions? Not about the death process yet, and not about any questions yet about how to help at the time of death. We're getting to that. This is just the background, okay? So what I've discussed so far, not what I haven't discussed, what I have discussed, give me those questions. And then I know many of the other questions are about how to help. That'll come soon. That's coming. That's coming. Okay. Where are you? Who's asking the questions? Kata Sky. Go, baby.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. So if a person is sick and he does suicide to avoid great pain, and in this case suicide is a blessing, or
I understand. Okay, I understand. So this is the point we've got to get to. Let me think. Well, let's just do it now. We can do it now. So before we do that, because that'll describe the death process. So let me hear the other questions, and I'll see which ones I'll be able to answer soon, or whether I should answer them now. How many questions are there that aren't about helping people? That's all going to come. What other questions are there?
Around 10 questions, I guess. 10, 12 questions.
Give me the rough idea what they are.
These questions are about people suffering from cancer, people dying, and how to help to
Okay, it's all coming.
Death experience.
What?
Death experience and Bardo experience. How
karma. All coming. What else?
There's also a question: what is war from Buddhist point of view? And,
what is what?
Genocide.
What is what?
Yes, what is war from Buddhist point of view? And
what is what?
War.
I can't hear the word. W-A-R. War.
War. Yes.
Like I said before, it's okay. Well, let's analyze. What is war? Like people fighting, isn't it? One group of people hating another group of people and wanting to kill them. Is that not war? I mean, what's that? If you have to understand karma, obviously, you have to know what karma means. So karma is actions that you do in the past ripen in the present. So if if you're in a war and you're either doing the killing or you're getting killed, that's the fruit of your having been killed, and that's the fruit of you killing. So whatever you experience, like I said before, whatever you experience is the fruit of your past karma. You can be observing it. Well, even that's the fruit of your past karma. One of the karma ripens as environmental karma, the way the physical world impacts upon you. One type of karma is ripening as an experience. If you're in the war, the environmental result of past anger, past harming, is that you see it and it's around you. One result of past killing is that it happens to you, or another result of past killing is you do the killing. So it's a result of anger and killing, isn't it? Basically. What else?
There's also a question about near-death experience.
Yeah, okay, well, good. We'll talk about that. Talk about it. All coming. All this is coming. What else?
Okay.
That's it. What is coming? All the answers will get answered, I promise.
No. Huh? There's also a comment like yesterday one good man committed suicide, and he was not a Buddhist. So, today his second day of death, and the body was taken to the morgue, and friends are doing some powers from different comments. So how can
we can do some prayers for him. We can do the medicine Buddha. At the end of the practice, we'll do a little 5-minute medicine Buddha practice, and we can include everybody we want to include in some prayers, even the people suffering now, people dying, or people we know, or animals who are dying. We'll do a little 5-minute medicine Buddha meditation before we finish. We'll do that for him as well. Even think of him right now. And if you know the medicine Buddha mantra, you say it this second for this kind man, this darling suffering man, Okay, but I think all these questions will get answered, and if they don't, we'll answer them individually. So let's go through this death process now then, okay? And at the same time, I will also describe the process of some of the 12 links that occurs at the same time. Okay, so the first one, and this is all in the book, all this is described in your book. Each of these stages are labeled in terms of a certain subtle vision, as they call it, that occurs at each of these stages. And these would occur every time you go to sleep, but only the great meditators are conscious of it, because they can replicate this process in their meditation. We can just meditate on it and pretend, and get familiar with the stages. But this occurs every time we go to sleep. This process is exactly what happens every time we go to sleep, but we're not conscious, we're not conscious because we haven't practiced. That's why sleep is a brilliant example, or meditation is a brilliant way the yogis practice. That's why death is what they've been waiting for, and I'll explain that. So at each of these 8 stages, various things cease to function. So the first one, there's an element, it ceases to function. There's a particular, what they call, there's a particular grouping of states of mind. They call them the 5 wisdoms. This is this general capacity of the mind to function in a certain way. So the first of these ceases each of these cease at each of the stages. Each of the elements cease. Each of the consciousnesses cease. These are the 3 main things. So there's the first one is the capacity of the mind, this wisdom they call it. The first one is the capacity of the mind to hold a lot of information all at once. And as you can see, like right now, we're wide awake. We're bright, kind of sharp and awake. So we can see our mind can hold a lot of information, let's say through our eye consciousness. Thousands of things in your room, you can see and grab them all. You're conscious of all of them. But when this starts to cease, everything's very vague. Look, when you start to go to sleep, you're sitting there talking to your friend and you're really tired. You can hardly hold any information. Now, at the same time, your eye consciousness ceases to function. Well, that's exactly what's happening, isn't it? You're looking at your friend, but you can hardly see anything. You're really struggling to stay awake because each of these energies is ceasing. They're kind of going inwards, dissolving. The third one is your earth element. Your body feels heavy, like lead. You know when you're really tired, you can hardly lift your body. It feels like a sack of potatoes. So the earth element is ceasing. The eye consciousness is ceasing. This capacity to hold a lot of information all at once is ceasing. We understand that. You're sitting there talking to your friends, what's happening? Then the subtle vision, they say, is the interplay of the earth element and the water element, because the earth element is ceasing and the water element is becoming prevalent. And they call it a vision of a mirage. Well, look at a mirage. It's exactly that, isn't it? It's kind of the earth and the water element interacting somehow, isn't it? Looks like that, doesn't it? Then the next stage is, and this is Lama Zopa tends to say this happens probably a couple of hours before you stop breathing. One of the signs of it'll be a couple of hours is that if your eyes are open, you no longer blink. That can be a sign it'll be a couple of hours before you stop breathing, which is already in other words, already the process has started. The next stage, the capacity of your mind, this wisdom, I don't know what they call it, to distinguish between pleasure, pain, and indifference. This is very vivid in daily life. This kind of all merge, Then your ear consciousness begins to cease to function. And around this time, this is the second of these 8 stages, it's about now that the other process, the 12 links, that this now kicks in. So what's going on in the 12 links process, as Lama Zopa says, the 8th and the 9th links are called craving and grasping, which are just 2 words for attachment. So these are functioning every millisecond of the day. Craving comes for something, like you think of the cake, and then the grasping kicks in, which is even more strong, and that makes you go get the cake. So this process is occurring, this is described in the 12 links of dependent arising in the Sutra teachings. So at the time of death, this craving begins to kick in now, but extra powerful attachment. Attachment to what? Mostly this. And in our life, as we know, we mainly in our modern world, we don't, unless we're Christian or something, or unless we're Buddhist, we don't think of anything but the body. This is me, as far as we're concerned. This is me. So we have this intense, unbelievable attachment to the body. That's this craving kicks in very strongly. Then it continues and becomes intense, unbelievable grasping. This is normal for everybody's death. Now, that grasping, the 9th one, that is the trigger. That's the condition that then triggers the number 2 link, which is called karma. So every millisecond of your day, every millisecond, you're sowing a seed in your mind. You're dropping seeds into your mind based on intention, doing something, speaking something, thinking something. Millions, as many moments as you can count in a day is as many, number 2, karmic seeds you're dropping into your bank vault, which will ripen in the future as a type of rebirth. There's this massive bank vault of billions of complete, what they call complete karmic seeds. You've got millions of negative ones, which if they are triggered will cause you to go to a suffering rebirth. And you've got a bunch of good ones, virtuous ones, and if they are triggered, you'll get a decent human body at the very least. And they're the ones we want to be triggered. So the condition that is the one that activates that seed at the time of death is that ninth link, the grasping. At about the time you start to stop listening, about the time your ear consciousness goes, about the time the second or maybe the third of these 8 stages cease, when you've still got your wits about you. And it's at this time that it's crucial. For example, if you've got your beloved is a Buddhist, and let's say your beloved friend is a Buddhist, and they're dying, and you're one of their fellow students of the same Lama, and you know that they want to hear their Lama's words, so you're saying prayers to that person. You're talking about how Lama Zopa loves you. Whatever's appropriate for that person at that time is when they need it most. So even when the grasping kicks in, then the sound of your Lama's name, or the seeing of the picture of Jesus, or the hearing about how God loves you, whatever that is that you're hearing from your beloveds around the bed, that will help you calm the mind down. But nevertheless, that grasping will still happen. And then if your mind is relatively peaceful and you're thinking of your guru, you're thinking of the Buddha, you're thinking of Jesus, whatever, and then that triggers the number 2 link, and it'll be a virtuous karmic seed that's triggered. It's a technical point. This is the time. Exactly when all this occurs. So then at the second stage, the ears cease, the earth element, the water element begins, or the liquid in the body begins to dry up. The liquids, your tears, the nose, the spit, the liquids. And this happens every time you go to sleep. And that's why when you wake up in the morning, when all the 8 stages of death, sleep are reversing, and you're coming back to wake up, you listen to that. When you wake up in the morning, you're so tired, you can hardly lift your body, can you? It's like lead, because the earth element hasn't come back yet. You feel dry, your eyes are dry, your mouth is dry, you need liquid because your water element hasn't quite come back yet. We all know that experience. We all know that experience. So at this point, the vision, so your ears are going, your water element's going, your the consciousness, the ears, the senses, and then the subtle vision is called like smoky vision, which is like an interplay. If you think about it, an interplay. No, is it smoky or is it sparks? Fire, air. No, smoky is like interplay of water and the next one, which is fire, like smoky, they say. Then the next stage, it's called sparks, like fire sparks. So it's the interplay of fire and the 4th element, air. But before that, your capacity to distinguish between friends, enemies, and strangers. You got your beloved auntie on one side of the bed, you got your ugly old grandfather on the right, and you can't tell the difference. You're gradually losing the plot. Your mind's getting less and less capable. All the pieces of you are falling away. You can't put 2 and 2 together. Then your eyes, ears, nose and tongue and touch. I think it's nose, ears, nose, tongue consciousness. I think tongue consciousness ceases. Taste disappears. The heat in your body, the heat disappears. And this is the point, depending on whether your heat leaves your head first or leaves your feet first, because everything ends up gathering at the heart chakra. These energies all deconstruct from the bottom up and from the top down. So they say that if the heat is leaving your head first, you're in trouble. It looks like you're going to the lower realms already, because you see, this is the point, already before that sign, already the karmic seed that'll determine your next life has been triggered. And this very much determines the way the heat goes, and it determines how the experience of your death. Because at this point, you still can move, you can still hear things. So they always say, if it's a negative seed that's triggered, it's literally because your mind's getting more subtle. Lama Zopa talks that 5 different things can happen. You can freak out completely, you can think you're hallucinating, but because your mind's getting more subtle, you're seeing your future suffering rebirth, your hell realm or your spirit realm or the animal realm, and it's very terrifying. So it's really a horrifying experience, like you're having a vision of it, because your grosser mind is ceasing, so you can see what's coming. This is natural. People often have it in their dreams because that's your subtle mind. It's capable of seeing these things. At the same time, you know, you could be shitting yourself. You could be freaking out. I mean, I've heard many stories like this. And that's the sign that a negative seed has been triggered. Your suffering rebirth has been programmed, you know. Or if it's a virtuous karmic seed, you'll be radiantly happy, you'll be joyful, and because your mind's getting more subtle, you see it's like either a pure land is coming or the God realms or a human realm. So it's a very blissful experience. People are looking you see people looking at something's blissful. I always tell the story about how Steve Jobs died. I love Steve Jobs, the Apple fellow. As far as I'm concerned, Apple has gone downhill since he died. They haven't got one decent product since he died. They're just resting on their laurels. They're going to collapse very soon. That's my personal opinion, as if you're interested in my personal opinion. So I love Steve Jobs. I think he's a genius. Anyway, the point is, he knew he was dying, apparently. He had cancer. And several years before, and you could tell by the way he spoke, the talks that he gave, he was really in touch with impermanence, you know. And it was interesting, I read the biography of one of his daughters from his previous marriage. And I remember she talked about one time she went to see her father when he was very sick, and this Tibetan monk was there. And it's actually a friend of mine in San Francisco. He's a Brazilian or Argentinian, and he's been recognized by Lati Rinpoche as a reincarnated Lama, Sergei Lama or somebody. I can't think of his name, and he's a healer. Well, he was there with Steve Jobs. So that made me happy to think that he had some connection with the Dharma, you know. But anyway, the day he died, his sister, they'd been given away when they were children, babies, and then they met again later in life, and she was a writer, so she wrote about this experience. She said she went to see him on the day he died, and she's I don't know, did I tell this story? Did I tell this story, Diana? Okay, good. I love this story. So anyway, there's Steve, and he's been knowing for several years he's dying. So his family are there. He's on the bed. So the only way I can describe it, I'm like the sister, and just in front of me is Steve, and I can see Steve's face. I'm facing him, but his two daughters are in front of him, and all I can see is the back of their heads, and he's looking into their eyes. And she said something like how he was full of so much love. He was looking at them with incredible love, begging them to forgive him for leaving them, not like freaking out and panicking and grasping, not like that. And then she said, he looked over their shoulders into the distance and he went, oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow. And then he died. Well, that was real quick. But my sense is that's the second stage. The karmic seed was triggered. His mind was full of love and full of virtue. There was no grasping, no fear. So that triggered a very powerful, virtuous karmic seed. And suddenly his mind's getting more subtle. And he's literally, as his mind's getting more subtle, you get clairvoyant. You're seeing your future life coming. And he was blissed out. Oh, wow. It's only died. Well, I was very happy for him. I hope it was a pure land, not the God realms or something, waste his life there. And I love that story anyway. Another experience, a friend of mine, I'm sure I told you this one. A friend of mine, Australian guy, is at Ven.Robina Institute. I think I did tell this. Years ago, he was working on the roof at the center in California, and he's married to one of the women there. He's Australian, and he fell off the roof. And the wife said that he's dying in her arms, and he was radiant. He was blissful. So a virtuous karmic seed must have been triggered in his mind as well. That's the cause of how you die. So once the karmic seed is triggered, and you can see people freaking out, you know the karmic seed is triggered, and then you've got to try and find the way to be their mind to be as peaceful as possible. You can try and reverse it. It's possible to reverse it. It's pretty strong already, but if it's virtuous and they're blissful, it's best just to leave them and let them hear the mantra and die peacefully. And that's why for at least 3 days, you don't disturb them, because they can still be conducive to something upset. And if you move their body or cut their body, which is what people do, you know, because the mind might not leave, and we're going to talk about this. This is a really important point. The subtle mind might not leave the body for 3 days after you have stopped breathing. And you need to leave it until the mind has left. That's why it's quite difficult for most people. In a hospital, you don't have more than a half an hour. The one of cutting out organs, this is a huge one. I'll talk about that as well. So the fourth stage is you no longer can eat the wisdom you have. This wisdom is no longer, you can even distinguish who you are. You've completely lost the plot. You don't even know who you are. Any word you think of, there's no longer any ability to put things together. That wisdom is gone. Your tactile consciousness and your tongue consciousness. Tongue, I said that before. Nose, maybe nose. Maybe nose goes before, now tongue. Tongue and tactile, I think, now cease, the fourth stage. And as Lama Geshe Rabchen, one of my teachers, one of Lama Zopa Lama Yeshe's teachers, always quote this, that tongue, they say it turns blue at the root, right? And goes short. He said, that tongue that has spent its life gossiping is now useless. So that ceases to function. Tactile ceases, tongue ceases, breath goes out and doesn't go back in. And I've heard many stories about people that can last for hours. You know, I don't know about all those variations. I'm just quoting Lama Zopa's teachings. So by this point, and then the subtle vision, the vision at this point is like just the kind of the light, the way the song Rinpoche described it, you know, the light, kind of that yellow light around a candle flame just before it goes out. There's a subtle light like that, like a candle flame, like a candle light, they say. That's the vision. That point now, the West thinks you're dead. The materialist view thinks you're dead, but you're not dead yet. That's your gross consciousness. That's the outer breath has ceased. As Lama Zopa says, now the inner breath is still there, this inner wind energy, this prana. The subtle mind, all the different states of mental consciousness are still there. The subtle winds are still there, the kundalini, all of this. And in other words, your subtle mind is there. So now, especially at this point, is when it's got to be totally only quiet. Only thing to be heard is prayers, mantras, etc., etc. And that's basically, you treat the room where the dead person is like a shrine room. You only have people in there doing prayers and practices. It's like a holy, special place. Nothing but that should happen. And best to have it 24 hours a day, like in the monasteries, they do that. You know, people can come, you can bring the monks, you can have your lamas come or your friends come, and you rotate, you do roster, you know, 2 or 3 hours at a time, saying all the prayers for 3 days. And Rinpoche lists all these practices, you know, they're all there, what to do. So now the chapters are broken up into, once the consciousness has, once your loved one has stopped breathing. So the different scenarios in which that can happen, isn't it? One is what to do if your loved one dies at home, what to do if your loved one dies in hospital or an institution, what to do if your loved one dies suddenly, what to do if your loved one gives their organs, what to do if your loved one is a meditator. Well, the fifth one is, if your loved one's a meditator, you just close the door and leave them in peace. They know what they're doing. But the first one is the ideal one. The first one is if your loved one dies at home, or at least where you can have control. I mean, you know, if you've got enough money, you can afford a private nursing home, or you can afford a private hospital in a private room in a hospital. That's the ideal, where you can completely control the scenario, have only the things that are worthwhile in there, the right things for your loved one. And when your loved one stops breathing, you close the door and that's it, you know, then you have the 3 days. As a friend of mine did, when her husband died in a private nursing home, she shooed out all the doctors and nurses, locked the door and stayed there for 3 days. That was it. She took care, you know. If you can do that, best of all, you know. But the trouble, so then what you do is that all the practices to do at the time your loved one dies, they're all the same practices. Rinpoche mentions so many of them. But of course, if you've only got a half an hour, which is the next scenario, what to do if your loved one dies in hospital, then you still select at least some you can do, you know. So there's always a classic set of practices that are very traditional in the Gelugpa monasteries. There's one called the 8 prayers at the time of death. So a friend of mine, when she died, you know, when she died in hospital, a young woman, she's not even 30, 35 maybe, she died, all her organs just started to collapse. You know, she'd had a car accident. And so Geshe Dagpa came, he's our San Francisco Lama. So he had, you know, not very long, he had half an hour max. So he did these 8 prayers at the time of death, you know. There's certain prayers you can do, but you've got the choice. They're all there. Rinpoche mentions them. You can decide based on the conditions. Now, if you've got 3 days, you can do what you like. You can do so many. You can do all of the practices. 24 hours a day for 3 days. You couldn't do better than that. So if your loved one dies in hospital, the point is with hospital or with a nursing home, you know, you've got to be in charge of the process. Don't just, what happens is your loved one dies and we panic and we hand over all the power to the doctors and the nurses. And of course, their job is to take care of the body, not the mind. Well, your job is to take care of the mind. So you should know what's going on. If your loved one's in hospital, you should negotiate with the hospital beforehand. Ask them. I mean, I don't know what the hospitals are like where you live, but they're all different. But some hospitals are very kind and very spacious and very respectful and will do what you want, but you've got to organize it beforehand. Like if my mother's in hospital, and if you're going home to bed and your mother dies in the middle of the night, please tell them, don't touch her. First thing you do is call me and I will come. Things like this, you explain exactly what you want them to do, and then of course you request them, if when my loved one dies, can I have as much time as possible? As much time as possible. If they can give you 1 day, 2 days. I know I went to see an old Vietnamese family. They had a private room in a hospital in Adelaide, in Australia. And they were very kind. The doctors let them have this room as long as possible. I mean, it was incredibly kind. I mean, in Australia, you get free. I think they've got a national free medical system, which is very excellent, especially these days with COVID-19. They've practically conquered COVID-19, I think, now in Australia. Anyway, they've got free medical, all these things. So that they were able to have the father die. The family were around. I came for 1 hour and said prayers. I mean, that's the best scenario. And you'd be totally quiet. The only sound should be prayers. And this is the point now, because, and this is even when your loved one is dying and they're in a coma. This is a whole discussion now about how we think if they're in a coma, they're unconscious. We think if they're dead and stop breathing, they're definitely dead. No. Subtle mind is there, and the dream mind, the death process is exactly the same, like I said. So the first 4 stages, gradually your senses cease and you go to sleep. So you're not dead, but we know that the senses are unconscious, aren't they? But we know you can have dreams, and we know many people all over the world describe very vivid dreamlike experiences. They can have clairvoyance, they can fly here and there, they can see things, they can hear things. That's your subtle mind. It's got that capacity. So even if your loved one's in a coma, you still keep the place quiet and peaceful, because a person can be aware of what's going on. I mean, I had the experience one time in my life when I did my very first 3-month retreat, Vajrasattva retreat, after I became a nun. And we did it at Tushita in Dharamsala in the rainy season. So we just followed the Indian tradition of having a nap after lunch, So I remember this halfway through the retreat. I mean, I'm not much of a meditator, but if you're meditating 12 hours a day, something has to happen, So my mind was very vivid, very clear. And I go to deep sleep after lunch, but my mind, I had these crystal clear dreams, which is your subtle consciousness, which is exactly what's happening for the person who's dead, subtle consciousness. And it was very clear, and I could hear everything around me. I could hear what people were talking about. I couldn't see. Many people have the experience of literally seeing what's going on as well. They have the experience of out-of-body experiences. You don't leave your body. You don't fly around, astral travel. I know one Brazilian guy, this is 30 years ago, he came to the teachings in Dharamsala when I was giving a course, and he was come to the teaching every morning exhausted because he spent the night flying around the world, seeing his girlfriend, going to Africa. But you don't actually leave the body. You don't leave the body, but the subtle mind has the experience of floating above, watching things, but you don't leave your body. If you left your body, you're dead. The subtle mind is still there, but the subtle mind has that capacity. People have it in their dreams, clairvoyant experiences, seeing what's going to happen. That's really among you people right now, people have had that experience. That's just subtle mind. It's more powerful. Of course, we don't have much control over it, but the great yogis can. So when you're in a coma, that's why even if you're in a coma in the hospital or at home, you still keep the place quiet, because you can be totally conscious of what's going on around you. And I had that experience one time. A friend of mine in Sydney, she was in the IC, what do you call it? The ICU, the intensive care. She was in a deep, deep coma. They weren't even sure if she would come out of her coma. So I would go to visit her at night because it was late. And I lived like 50 kilometers away, so it was better to drive at night because you can drive quick at night and there's no traffic. So I'd go at about midnight and spend about an hour with her every night. It was rather funny because her husband, he was a judge. He rang the hospital and said, could I come to see her every night? Because I'm her spiritual pastor, like her priest, And he told them I was a Buddhist. And they got a bit nervous. When I came, they got a bit nervous and they said, oh, please don't ring any bells. I wouldn't ring any bells. Anyway, I just sit there with my friend Judy and I'd do prayers in her ear. And then occasionally I'd say, because you see, she was very close to many lamas. She'd had them stay at her house. And so she was close to Sakya Trinzen and to Songtsa Khyentse Rinpoche. So I'd rung their students and asked them to ask the lamas to pray for Judy. So every now and again, I'd say to Judy in a whisper in her ear, Judy, His Holiness Sakya Trinzen's praying for you. Judy, Songtsa Khyentse Rinpoche is praying for you. Anyway, after weeks, she came out of her coma. She was all totally fine. But she told me the only thing she remembered in that entire period was this husky voice. She said she didn't know it was me. She thought it was a blue lady coming out through the window, saying the words exactly. Judy, His Holiness Sakya Trinzen is praying for you. Judy, Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche is praying for you. So I've heard many stories like that, whether it's Jesus or anything, because these powerful energies in the world, the Buddhas, the holy beings, are all there at a subtle level. So when your mind is more subtle, you can contact them. That's the point. That's why it's so powerful to do prayers and practices for your pussycat and your dog and the mouse and the ant. Same. It can bless their mind. So many stories like that. That's your subtle mind, so capable. So keep as quiet as you can, because that's when they're really susceptible and can be conducive to very great blessings, you know. And even when you're dead, which I'll get to in a second, on the operating table and they're taking your organs. This is really interesting. I'll tell you about that. So the next scenario, what if your loved one dies suddenly? Well, this is difficult, isn't it? Because we're not expecting it. Your grandma's eating her soup and she drops dead, or she looks like she drops dead. Straight away, what do? We panic. The first thing we do is we call the ambulance. So that's not going to help. If she's dead, yes, no rush. If she's already dead, then don't rush. But do what you can if you know how to see if you can still bring her back to life. But right there, be ready for this and do prayers, do mantras, make her peaceful. Don't just panic and take her to the hospital. That's what happened to one of my friends, a husband, a wife, and a daughter, all Buddhist. And he had a very bad heart. And he got his wife to promise that if I have a heart attack, because he knew this time it'd be end, you know, do not call the ambulance. Well, she panicked and she called the ambulance, you know, he had a heart attack. So he was in the hospital and me and the daughter went there very early in the morning and he was all wired up, you know, and you knew he didn't want this. He didn't want this. So we did all the prayers that he wanted and then they pulled the plug, you know, they pulled the wires out, whatever. So then they were very kind, the hospital, and they carefully wrapped him in the thing and put him in the ambulance. They had to take him away. They couldn't leave him in the hospital. And this is one of the options you could do. One of the options you could, as Lama Zopa said, you could ask the hospital, and most hospitals don't mind doing this because they sometimes have to keep bodies for months. But you can ask the hospital to take the body and put it in the fridge in the hospital and leave it there for 3 days. That's the best. Go home and you do your practices and you come back in 3 days and the body then gets done. That's a possibility if you've only got a half an hour. Or the other one is, in this case, they didn't keep the body, but they were very kind and they gently drove it, you know, to the mortuary, because you shouldn't disturb the body really. And then we were allowed to stay all day with the body, doing all the prayers and practices. And then we come up back the next day and the same thing. So that's not in the book because that was my personal experience. But if you can do what you can to get the body to be as disturbed as little as possible so that you can do practices and prayers. So if you know that by that, you know, in 1 hour, the mind has left the body, then there's no reason to do things. You can just let the body go. The mind has gone. But until you're certain the mind has gone, you try to keep it as long as possible. That's the point, as well as you can. Be skillful, you know. But also the point about when the mind's in a coma or even after you stop breathing, you still keep it peaceful because they can be aware. And this is where we now get to the next scenario, which is really fascinating, is what to do if your loved one wants to give their organs. Well, all the lamas, everywhere I've ever read, they praise this is an amazing practice. As Lama Zopa says in the book, it's so special to actually want to give your organs. He said it's the action of a bodhisattva. It's so special to give your organs. But there are difficulties with it. I mean, I remember reading a book by an American medical journalist while I was editing this book of Lama Zopa's. It was very fascinating. I'd never thought about what happened once they gave organs. I just thought that, you know, like, and all the lamas praise it. They did, I think, but they didn't know the details, and Lama Zopa didn't know the details either. And I didn't learn the details until I started reading this book and learning about what happens. So I told Rinpoche how once you stop breathing, they keep you, then they put you on, you know, they keep your heart beating, they keep you breathing. They think you're dead. The Western view says you're dead. But for the Buddhist point, this Vajrayana, you're not dead. But you look alive. And this guy in this book, he said, now because of this big industry of taking organs, and he was very cynical in many ways. I mean, on the one hand, it is an amazing arrogance of some of this industry, how they manipulate the governments. People, even in Europe now, one of the laws, they've changed the law in many countries that when you die, you will give your organs unless you say you don't want to. It used to be the other way around. So there, he was really quite, you know, he was really quite cynical about the arrogance, the elitism of all these doctors, because it's the top bit of the medical profession. I'm not criticizing giving, and Lama Zopa says it's a special practice, but there's dangers, and so this is the point I'm getting to. So the danger is that your mind is still in the body when they cut out the organs. Now, generally speaking, it might not be disturbing, but he quoted in this book a very fascinating example of one woman who had to have, this one woman who was giving her organs, and there she was, she'd stopped breathing. They keep her breathing. Her heart is beating. As far as they are concerned, she's a dead person. But of course, as Lama Zopa said, if the breath can still breathe, even artificially, if the heart can still beat, if the body is still warm, this is the proof that consciousness is still there. In other words, if the body were actually dead, meaning the consciousness had actually left the body, you could never get a dead body to breathe again. It's not possible. It's just a piece of flesh. There's no consciousness there. So in other words, having the heartbeat and the warmth existing is because the consciousness is still there. This is the Buddha's view. So anyway, there's this woman on the operating table. So first of all, in this book, he had a whole chapter, this journalist. He was an atheist himself. He has no viewpoints about this. He doesn't believe in God or anything. He doesn't have any viewpoint, but he reported these people's experiences. He had a whole chapter on people who had what they call out-of-body experiences, you know. But and of course, most of the doctors that are cynical, nah, not possible. Somebody's told us something. They don't believe it, you know. But one particular woman, and he joked about it, she had to have a really radical procedure, such that they had to practically make her dead. She couldn't, in other words, from their point of view, she could not have had any awareness, no possibility. But she reported the most vivid out-of-body experience, so precise, nobody could argue with it. So they don't know what to do with that. They don't know how to explain it. Of course not. So he joked about this woman. Anyway, the point is, this other woman who's giving her organs, there she was on the operating table, and the nurse monitoring the heartbeat, because they keep you breathing on the operating table. They keep you all wired up. Your heart's beating, the body's all toasty and warm, you know, the breath is coming in and out, just like an ordinary person, but that's artificial. But they think she's dead. So the point is, but as far as Buddhists, this view, her mind is there. So that means her subtle mind is conscious. Now, many of those people who are on the operating table under anesthetic, their subtle mind has an experience of seeing what's going on. That can be exactly the same for the person who's called dead. Their subtle mind is still there. So it too can have that experience. And my sense is this experience I'm about to tell you, that's exactly what happened. That the nurse monitoring the heartbeat on the computer said as soon as they got the circular saw ready to cut her from head to toe, she wouldn't have felt anything because her senses had ceased, not a problem. But as soon as that happened, she noticed the heart went from 100 to 200 beats a minute. And the author joked and said, I wonder what a dead person has to be worried about. Well, that for me is exactly the explanation that her subtle mind, in her case, was conscious. This is not impossible. Not everybody will have that, just like not everybody has an experience of floating above your body when you have an operation. You could be unconscious. So it wouldn't disturb all the people whose mind is not aware of it. It might not disturb them to cut out the organs. And Lama Zopa even says that even if they've cut your organs out, it even still doesn't mean that your mind has left the body. So when you get the body back after the operation, you can still do those practices and make sure there's certain things you do to help the mind leave. But in the case like that woman, who for sure, because her virtuous motivation was to help others, that's why she gave her organs. So at the time when she stopped breathing, because of her pure motivation, that would have triggered a virtuous karmic seed. So she was programmed to take a human body. But that can change. And what changed it? Because you disturbed her body and she was seeing what was happening. So she freaked out. That can easily then trigger a negative seed and cause her to get a lower realm rebirth. So as Lama Zopa says, the hospitals have to be careful. All the yogis have to talk about this, but they've got to be careful. So it doesn't mean everybody will be distressed. Because if you're not aware of what's happening when they cut you open, then your pure motivation counted and you're ready for a decent human rebirth. But it can be disturbed and it can change. So there's a danger, he said. So that's up to one more point, then I'll ask you some questions in. So the point is here, if you got the 3 days, or whether you have a half an hour in the hospital, or whether you got 3 days in the fridge, or whatever you choose to do, there are prayers and practices you must do in that period that can help the mind, you know. And then before you have to move the body, you need to check if the consciousness has left. And sometimes you can force the consciousness to leave. So the way you check, one of the ways to check, as I said, all the gradual process of death, all the energies are going from the crown down to the heart chakra and from the feet up to the heart chakra. So if you put your hand just above the heart chakra, and this is for your dog or your pussycat as well, put your hand just above the heart chakra, the rest of the body will be very cold, but if you feel it warm there, then that means the mind is still there. They say that's a pretty good test. Another test is when that indestructible drop opens and the very subtle mind leaves, then the drops continue up and the pink one the red one comes out of here for the girls, I think, I'm forgetting which one, and the white one goes down and comes out the penis for the male. So you can see these indications of these subtle liquid. I mean, it might be a bit messy to see it, but that is another sign that the mind has left the body. So you need to make sure. So if you're not sure the mind has left and you have to give the body away after half an hour in the hospital because they've got to take it and do their job, what you would do is tap very vigorously or pull the hair very vigorously at the crown where the crown chakra is. And that could encourage the very subtle consciousness to come up and out through the crown chakra. Because where the consciousness leaves the body is an indication of the rebirth. So that could help them get a Pure Land rebirth. If it goes through if it leaves out through the eyes, you'll get a human rebirth. Of course, you can't tell because we can't see. If it goes through the mouth, you get a spirit rebirth. If it leaves through the anus, I think you get a hell rebirth. And through the sex organ, you get an animal rebirth, something like that. So that's it. So now your mind has left the body, and then we go to the next stage and what we do for the next days after the mind has left the body. But now I think it's time for questions before we finish. So just read those questions, and some of my questions might have been answered, but some not. Katiskai.
Sure. The question is about near-death experience. So why did those who had near-death experience see what they believe in? For example, why do people who had near-death experience see what they believed in?
Do what? I can't hear words.
What they learned, or Christians see dead people, lie to Jesus.
Okay, I see. No, I understand. Good point. Good question. Our mind is full of karmic imprints based upon all the conceptual thoughts we have. So the way things appear to us in our daily life as well as our dreams, as well as our near-death experiences, they appear according to the conceptual stories we have in our mind. So it's a good example. I remember watching 25 years ago, nearly 30 years ago on the internet, watching a movie by an American doctor who had interviewed many of his patients about near-death experiences. So they weren't all the nice, pleasant ones about white light. It was very interesting. So there was one experience of one fellow who was in hospital waiting for his heart operation. And he was very anxious when it was going to happen. And his wife was sitting by the bed. And all of a sudden, he finds himself standing next to his wife and he's talking to her, but she doesn't listen. And he kind of gets annoyed. But then he looks at the bed and he realizes that his body is in the bed. He couldn't quite get what was happening, but clearly he's having a so-called out-of-body experiences. But technically, he hadn't left the body. If you leave the body, you're dead. But your subtle mind has that experience, can have that experience. So then he hears a voice calling him from the corridor, John. He says, oh, good, I've got my operation coming. So he finds himself walking along the corridor with these people, this person. And first of all, he said they were really nice, but soon they became mean and ugly and brutal and ripped his flesh and abused him. It was the most horrifying experience. And he said, but the first point I find very fascinating, before I tell you the rest of the story, he said, the walk along that corridor took as long as walking from here to Alaska. Well, even if it was the next state to Alaska, it shows it was an experience of a long, long time. It was probably no more than a human minute that he had that experience, which is really interesting how he described time, isn't it? It felt incredibly long time. but actually not more than a minute, I suppose. So anyway, the point is, eventually they'd abused him, ripped his flesh. That was his experience. And then they left him. And he was in complete darkness, he said, the likes of which he'd never known, the darkness and despair. And he didn't know what to do. And then he said to himself, I should pray. Well, he hadn't prayed since he was a little boy. So he started the prayers, Our Father who art in heaven, and he couldn't go any further. Then he thought, oh, well, the Lord is my shepherd, and he couldn't go any further. And then he just shouted from his heart, Jesus, help me. And then from a long, long distance, a tiny light. And then as the light moved towards him, it was Jesus. And it was radiant light. And it healed his body, made him completely blissful. He was completely encompassed by this radiant light of Jesus. And of course, he wanted to go with Jesus. And Jesus says, no, you've got to go back and serve me. Well, I mean, you would, wouldn't you? He did. So that's how he woke up. Now, that experience, he would not have seen a green lady, naked green lady called Tara, I promise. Why? Because the karmic appearance he had was due to his own thoughts, his own culture, the way he constructed his own stories. Everything that appears to us, we think it exists from its own side. That's exactly what ignorance is. No, it's his karmic appearance. It's his karmic appearance. He called it Jesus. Everybody I've ever read about who's had all these kind of out-of-body experiences while they've been in a coma, they talk about God, they talk about Jesus, because that's their karma. That's the view they have. That we create those views. So if you see your mother and all those things, that's an interesting, different discussion. Because, that too can just be your karmic appearance. Because, when anybody dies, from the second the mind leaves the heart chakra, from that second, Lama Zopa says, from that second, you now have finished that rebirth. Even as you're moving towards the experience of the intermediate state, you can see your body, but there's no connection. There's no memory of it. There's no interest in the past life. So then when people see their grandmother, I mean, especially if it's weeks later, that's not a possibility, because the grandmother, within a few weeks, everybody takes rebirth. Your grandmother could be in the hell realms. Your grandmother could be a spirit, or she could be in the God realms, in which case she would appear to you like your grandmother. You know how people who say about houses that are haunted, they see the 16th century lady. That would be the person in the form that person had back in the 16th century when they lived in that house. But right now, because of their attachment to that place, they're born as a spirit in that place. They don't really look like that, but that's the karmic vision you have. So, I mean, there's many things at play there, and I can't answer all the questions, but it's kind of interesting. What else?
I guess this person has also the second part of the question about his fear. Why I have a fear from this thought that everyone is seeing what they believe in. Then in general, there is no certainty and confidence in the teachings.
Sky, your voice is breaking up. I can't hear you properly. I'm really sorry. I'm missing what you're saying.
Just a second, I'll turn. So the person has a fear from the thought that everything, a fear from thought that, well, everyone sees something of their own, right? Buddhists see Buddhist things and Christians see Christian things. And it turns that there is no certainty in these things. And because we should see something like there should be one truth, and when people are dying, they should see.
No, that's not true. What do you mean by one truth? That's ridiculous. What do you mean by one truth? That proves no emptiness. If there's one truth, if you hate, I mean, no, that's disproving emptiness. Everything is empty of inherent existence, which means everything is dependent arising. And what is everything dependent upon? The mind, how it sees it. It's not possible there's something out there from its own side. That completely is disagreeing with dependent arising and emptiness. You've got to think about that. Of course, there might be one truth. Buddha would say emptiness is one truth. But if we can't see emptiness, then what we see, just because there's one truth, ultimate reality is true, and it's already existing in front of us. But what we see is not what's in front of us. What we see is our own karmic projections. That's the problem. Not to be afraid of that. That's why if you have confidence in your path and you practice every day and you understand emptiness, and then exactly the right things will appear to you. The opposite reason, you would not be afraid. You're giving the very reason for being afraid as the reason to be not be afraid, because you are in charge of the process. Truth is not out there from its own side. You have to see the truth, and you have to you have to see the truth by changing your mind. So you should be in charge of it, and that should make you happy, not suffer. That's my answer to you. What else?
How does karma and free will correlate with each other?
Well, we always ask this question around the world. Every country I've ever been to, we ask the same question. It's very, 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 very fascinating. So my first point to you is, we all talk about free will now as if it's a scientific truth, but we should give it its appropriate historical source. It's a teaching of the Christians that when God made us, he gave us the capacity to choose, which they call free will. But let's analyze those words. From the Buddhist perspective, they're meaningless. Free will. I mean, what does free mean? Free means not dependent, meaning absolute. There's no such thing existing. Of course, we have the capacity to choose, but it's based on what? It's based on dependent arising. You can choose to play the piano if you have a tendency in your mind from having played the piano. You can choose to lie if you've got a tendency in your mind from having lied. You choose not to lie based upon the habit of having not lied. So the ability to choose is not free, it's dependent on what you've done before. This is the proof of it. Of course, you've got the choice, but it's not an absolute choice, which is what free will indicates, which is just plain foolish. So karma proves you've got the capacity to choose, but it's dependent arising, it's contingent, like everything existing in the universe. Next question.
At what stage of dying is it possible to return?
That's a good point, because we have many experiences all around the world. There are many experiences, aren't there, around the world of people, quote unquote, coming back to life. It just means that you have the karma to start to die, but you've still got petrol in your tank. So you don't die, you come back to life. And it can happen. I mean, I've heard many stories of people, like Lama Zopa talks, not in this book, I don't think, maybe in this book. Some guy had the karma to regularly look as if he's dead, put him in the coffin, and he wakes up again. It happened many times. So that it can be, I mean, many days later even. People have had the experience of even that happening many days later. In other words, they've gone through the death process to the point where they've stopped the physical breath. Their subtle mind is still there, but the karma hasn't finished. So they come back to the gross level again. And this is why, this is one of the big reasons in this particular book by this American medical journalist he found so interesting, which is the source of why now, which is the point of his book, why there's so much confusion in like the American medical profession about exactly when death is. Because first of all, because one of them is because of this experience, which everybody's known about for centuries, but for the medical profession, it's just too hard to deal with it. They don't know how to explain it. But now it's become a real interference, because then when they think a person is dead and they come back to life and they've got to put their liver back in, you know, I'm joking a little bit. So this is a really good point. It's a very good point, and it's forcing them to think things differently. I remember one, and also this experience of out-of-body experiences on the operating table. All this is coming up now, so people are getting very confused, which is actually is brilliant, because it's forcing the scientific world to rethink their assumptions about what death is, and that was the point of this book. So anyway, the one doctor quoted in this book said, I can now say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I don't know what it is, but I can say that much. So I think it's brilliant that people are looking into all this, you know. So anyway, go on. What else?
How can you help a dying person who is not good?
All the things I said before. Yeah, all the things I said. One of the crucial points is, like I said before, these different chapters Rinpoche's got. So you select, if you understand the point of all these practices is to help your loved one be peaceful. You can be a communist and be peaceful. You don't have to be you can be a dog. A dog isn't anything. A dog has got a mind. So as long as you give this is the answer, the appropriate conditions that's conducive for your beloved person who's not a Buddhist, not a this, not a that, your dog, your cat, the mouse, whatever, a baby. They've got no time to have thoughts about being Buddhist. You make it peaceful for them. And then depending on the person. I mean, there's nothing, you know, if it's your little baby, your baby, you can play mantras to them. If you're a Christian, you play prayers to them. But, you know, the Buddhist point of view, if a person isn't a Buddhist, but they've got, you know, but they're a lovely person with ethics, then one of the things you can do about talking to them, one of the types of practices Rinpoche talks about is what to talk about, what to discuss. Well, you know, if it's a Christian, you talk about God, how God loves you, how heaven is beautiful, how all your friends are waiting in heaven for you to come. This will make their mind happy and help them be peaceful. Obviously, you don't talk that to a communist. But if, you know, your mother's, say, an atheist and has no faith, but she's got a good heart and she's a good person, one of the things you can talk to her about, and this is everybody, you talk about her good qualities. You praise your mother. We don't often do that to each other. And ourselves, we never think of our own good qualities. So you praise your mother. What a wonderful life you've had. What a good mother you've been. What a good wife you've been. What a good grandmother. How kind you are. So you lift her heart. You make her feel relaxed and peaceful. This is very powerful. That's how you'd help and make it peaceful. And even, you know, many people listen to Buddhist music now. They don't think of it as religious. So you could play mantras, which are very peaceful, very soothing, you know. You could do that, but you've got to know what the person likes and what they like to do. There's lots of ways to help. Make them peaceful and virtuous, say good things to them, praise them, love them, be kind, be sweet to them. This is very powerful. What else?
How can we help bardo beings?
What, sorry? Sorry, darling.
How can we help the sentient beings who are in bardo? Do we have connection?
No, I understand. No, there's first of all, how to help any sentient being is according to your capacity, your wisdom, but also according to their capacity to be helped. It's a mutual thing. It's dependent arising. So, you know, you have to know the person. So if you're trying to help your grandmother, you have to understand where your grandmother is at, then you know how to help her. Have to help a baby, whatever. Now, if people in the bardo, this intermediate state, which is just like a dream state for them, but the dream state for them is dependent on the karma that was triggered before they stopped breathing. So if their future life is going to be like a hell realm, and that usually you wouldn't have much of a bardo, there's no waiting around to get a hell realm. There's no waiting around to get an animal realm either. Your bardo will be very powerful, very, 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 very fearful. So whether you can, you know, we can't, if we're not clairvoyant, we can't do anything, but you can get lamas to do prayers. You can do practices and prayers for people. And the more powerful the people are who do the prayers, the more likely they are able to help them. That's the best you can do. What else? What else, sweetheart?
Is Tonglen really helping others?
I can't hear you. Your voice disappears. I'm sorry.
Helping.
Your voice disappears.
Okay. Is Tonglen helping others or just a practitioner? How can you make helping someone else more effective?
I know this gets very confusing for us. I don't know why. It's very curious. Let's think about this. Let's analyze it. What you're doing when you do Tonglen actually is what you're doing is literally imagining somebody who's sick. And then when you breathe in, you're imagining taking their sickness away. You're imagining taking the sickness upon yourself. And then when you breathe out, you're imagining giving them all the happiness and giving them all your good things. It's your mind imagining it. Well, first of all, we get confused and think if we're thinking that, we're supposed to be helping the other person. We're completely misunderstanding. That's a bit like if you are training to be a doctor and you are, you know, you're training on a dead body. And you're training even just writing it in you're training, imagining what you do if you did this operation, imagining what you would do if you did that operation. You're not doing any operation on anybody, but you're showing that you're training yourself to familiarize your mind with the techniques of that operation so that eventually you've practiced it so well. And guess what? Now you're qualified to do that operation. Well, it's exactly the same with Tonglen. It's a method for you to get bodhicitta. What else do you think it is? It is not a healing method. It is not for the sake of the other person. Don't be ridiculous. They've got their headache. They're over in Australia with their headache. If you want to do healing, do another practice. You know, do other practices. This is not a healing technique. It is training for you to get such compassion and train yourself every day till eventually you would do that for another. You would give your life for another. You would give them all your happiness. That's what you're doing, just like if you're training to be a doctor. No one pretends when you're training to be a doctor and you're answering all the questions in your exam that you're actually helping somebody, but you're training to help somebody, which is very confusing for us for some reason. When you're doing any of these meditations on equanimity or any of the compassion meditations, you're not actually doing the work then. You're training yourself to become like that. It's training. It's like training to play tennis so that you're ready to play Wimbledon. You're training. And that's what makes you be able to do it when the time is right. That's what you're doing. There's a lot of confusion about this. I don't know why. It's very odd. I hope that helps. I hope you understand. You're training yourself. You see, part of the problem is we are so addicted to thinking that a meditation is this little isolated little bubble and you're supposed to do these special things and hope it happens. You don't understand. Meditation is like going on the back courts of tennis every single day, doing all your backhands, training, training, training. Every time you sit down and you meditate on equanimity, you are training yourself to get equanimity eventually. Every time you do Tonglen, you're training yourself to eventually give others happiness and take upon yourself their suffering. You're not trying to do it in that second. You are training. And every day you meditate, you're building up your capability, like you play tennis every day and you build up your capability. But we're so addicted to thinking of meditation as some magical thing at that moment. It's very naive, actually. I'm not saying you're naive, but we have really weird misconceptions about it. It's called training. That's why they call it mind training. You're training. It's called training until eventually you perfect it. Then you can do what you trained to do, just like medicine, just like tennis. Same thing, exactly. What else, people? Time to go. Look, time finished. Gone like a dream, 2 hours. How many more questions?
There are some questions also from last week.
What are they?
They are one question about situations like Holocaust, people
What?
in Gulag and
Sorry,
death.
what? Sorry, what? Your voice breaks, darling. You're going to be doing the questions again next week. You better get a better mic or something, or a better position for your computer, because I miss half your questions, sweetheart, and I don't want to miss anything.
Yes, so
Hear me?
one of
Did
the
you hear what
questions
I
from
said?
the last week.
Cactus Guy, did you hear my advice?
Yes, I heard you.
Thank you,
I'll
darling.
try to find the mic.
Thank you, sweetheart. Not a mic, a better connection.
Okay.
Your Wi-Fi keeps losing, that's all. Go on, sweetheart. Get closer to the modem. Maybe that's a better idea. Go on.
So if we are talking about extreme situations like Holocaust, people in Gulag, death camps in Cambodia,
Sure. All of this.
so on, should a person being there accept it and so put it up with the powerful people who do these things for themselves? So should he?
I don't understand, darling. I do not understand the question, sweetheart. Please explain it.
Should this person who is going through these extreme situations accept this evil and have bad karma, or what?
I don't understand the question. I'm so sorry. I sort of understand your question, but I don't want to misunderstand you. Can you please get it into I can't understand Russian, so you have to get the right English words for me. Perhaps you can ask Diana, please, to translate it properly. I'm not trying to insult you, sweetheart, but I want to understand the question properly. So maybe ask Diana to do it and then tell me another question while she translates it or something. Forgive me.
Do it.
Can you see it, Diana? Can you turn your mic on?
Вопрос Олега с прошлой недели.
Ravinola, can you choose English channel? And Diana,
I can't hear you.
The button in the menu, down menu, can you choose English channel and then you can hear Diana translating the question, if it's possible? Can you see the menu with globe and there is translation? Yes, no?
What's happening? Diana's talked to me in the past. What's the problem?
If Diana will go out of translation, everybody will lose the ability to hear the translation in Russian. That's why there is two person who is translating.
Okay, what are we going to do then? Can you please put the English translation, give the English translation to Kataskai?
Or what?
Okay,
so you can hear
Diana,
me. Yeah.
Okay, tell me what,
Yeah.
what the question says.
There's a question about representatives of power who abuse of their power, like Gulag or Holocaust or Cambodia camps. And so do we have to resist, or do we have to humiliate ourselves?
I understand, darling. Oh, I mean, I don't know. I mean, this person, have they read history? They must have read Tibetan history. Have you not noticed the Tibetans? This is the perfect example of the Buddhist way of dealing with it. It's a perfect example. Whoever asked this question, have a look at Tibet. That's a living, perfect example and a perfect answer to your question. There's the Dalai Lama for 70 years, since he was 15, hasn't stopped trying to get freedom for Tibet. He's not stupid. He knows it's due to karma. That's why he's not angry. No Tibetans are angry, because what does anger say? Anger comes from the philosophy that I'm an innocent victim. I didn't ask to get born. Nobody knows why anything happens. There are all these monsters out there and no one knows the reason. So we are so confused. But if you have the view of karma, you don't think this way. Look at the Dalai Lama. He's a happy, funny fellow. He knows why this happened. You talk to any Tibetan who's been tortured and suffering. Look at the injustice of that country. 1 million or more of 1 million of the 6 people have been destroyed and are still being destroyed. But you can see by how they respond. They never stop fighting for their right and for their justice, because it's inappropriate that these people, the Chinese communists, rip out their country. But they know why it's happening. Karma is simply an explanation, as far as Buddha is concerned, of why things happen. Happiness is exactly the same reason. Happiness happens. Happiness is the fruit of our virtue. Suffering is the fruit of our non-virtue. It's a natural law. When the more we read this and understand it and apply it in our daily lives, we will just be like the Dalai Lama, who hasn't given up for 70 years. 70, never stopping, diplomatic, social, religious, spiritual, scientific, finding a way to try and help the Tibetan people get their freedom. It's appropriate to do that, but every Tibetan knows why it's happening. They know they created it from their own past suffering. So that there's no contradiction between these. I mean, Tibet is a perfect example, exact answer to your question. Of course, it's unjust. Of course, it's wrong to beat people up and kill them and drop bombs on them. But we don't have any logic in the materialist world for why it happens. If you have faith in God, if you have real faith in God, you would know that it's God's plan. Most Christians don't like to think that way. Many do, and many Muslims. It is God's will. That's a profound answer. At least there, someone's got a plan. It's called God. That's not Buddha's view. But in materialism, there is no answer. So all we have is rage and fear, and why do things happen? It's all good luck and bad luck. That's just superstition. The Buddhist view is, why does anything happen, including all the happy things? Everything we experience is the fruit of our past actions. When you know that, you won't want to do it again. You will purify the karma that created it. You'll have compassion for everybody else, especially the abusers. This is what comes as a result of the view of karma. In the beginning, I agree, it's really confusing to us because it contradicts so much what we think already. Because we don't think there are any reasons why things happen. We just think it's good luck and bad luck, which was no wonder we suffer. And that's why that experience of these young Tibetan nuns, I always quote this story, who came to, Richard Gere invited the Dalai Lama in 2003 to New York. And I was working for the prison project at the time. We're helping people in prison for many years. And he invited about 20 former prisoners, Americans, white, black, male, female, Puerto Rican, Mexican, a whole range of Americans, to have all of whom had done some kind of meditation in prison. And he invited them to come for the day to talk about their experiences and to meet the Dalai Lama. And people like me were invited, who worked with people in prison. It was a lovely day, a wonderful day, very moving. But he also invited 2 young Tibetan nuns who'd been abused and sexually abused and tortured in prison in Tibet for a couple of years. So this is the point I'm getting at. They are an example of a person whose philosophy, not just intellectually, but experientially, is the view of karma. Many Buddhists don't even like the view of karma, but the whole of Buddha's view of the universe. If there's no view of karma, the whole of Buddhism collapses into a heap of nonsense. Karma is fundamentally important to understand the Buddha's view of the universe, of why things happen, what is happiness, what is suffering, why things happen. Hang on, I just got to plug in my wire before we finish. So anyway, these young women, a classic example of a person who's got the view of karma. Karma's been around for 4,000 years from India. It's been the view that these great Indian yogis have observed to be reality. It's not just some hippie trippy made up by the hippies in the 60s. It's a highly sophisticated presentation of the physical and mental universe. It's an amazing philosophical presentation of the universe, of why things happen. It's always so shocking to us in our materialist culture because we have no view like this. Of course we don't. And of course, it's not like the Christian one where there's a boss. There's no boss. We all create our own reality. We don't need creating. We don't need punishing. We don't need rewarding. There's no view like that. But that view is deep in our mind. We made it up. It's a mistake, Buddha says. So anyway, these young women were telling, I remember this, they were there telling their experiences of being tortured, sexually abused. But what was really clear to these other Americans was that these young women were not angry. And if you wanted to quantify suffering, their suffering was probably worse than everybody else's, but they weren't angry. Now, we don't trust that in our culture. I think you Russians have lots of anger. I never forget when you drive cars, I've never seen anything like it. First of all, this guy, most people just put their fist out the window. This dude put his entire body out the window. There's so much rage. I was amazed by it. But anger is a good quality. You can transform it, okay? So that's why I like Russians. Anyway, never mind. So here's these young women telling their story about the sexual abuse and torture, but there were tears, but there was no anger. That's shocking for us. But analyze the philosophy of anger, please. What is anger saying? Anger is this horror, this shock. How dare this happen to me? I don't deserve it. That's what anger is. And the more that is deep in our bones as a philosophy, which it is, we've made it up because we have no view of cause and effect. And we believe it. That's why we suffer so badly. We go mad or we kill each other or ourselves. It's called anger. It's so simple. So these young women, why wouldn't they have that thought? Because they have the view of karma. It's deep in their bones since they're born. This is just implicit for them. They have that view. They have complete confidence in that view that everything they experience and all the good things as well. But the good things we take for granted. I've never met a person yet who says, why do good things happen? Who cares why? Just give me more, please, because we're greedy for good things. It's only when the bad things happen that we have a panic attack. And then we hear karma and we misunderstand it. Get all confused. Oh, I've got to sit here and suffer, ridiculous. So these young women, then one of them said, this is my point. And of course, we had compassion for our torturers because we know we must have harmed them in the past and because they will suffer in the future. In other words, the view of karma, which comes from the first stages of Buddhist practice, is for yourself. And from this, you get a wake-up call. You become accountable. You stop blaming. You stop feeling like a victim. You know that whatever you experience, including the happiness, you made it, baby. You created it, honey. Your life is your garden. All the flowers and herbs in it, you planted them. All the weeds, you planted them. So you own it. There's a sense of responsibility. So karma is a huge practice. So then from this, no anger, and then accountability and brave, and eventually even compassion for others. So that's the answer to that question to think about. Maybe time to go. All right, everybody. Thank you. People, everybody, Kataskai, Diana, Anastasia, Andre's gone. Thank you, people. Alessia, good morning, precious one. Alessia's in Rome. Alessia looks like she's in her office.
Medicine.
Where are you?
Medicine with the practice?
Yeah, we will do it. I'm just talking to Alessia. Looks like you're in an office, Alessia. What's that?
Yes, I am at the office.
I thought so. It looks very professional.
Yes.
Alessia, she's in Rome. Thank you, precious one. Let's do 3 minutes of medicine Buddha. Visualize the Buddha, but he's blue, not like golden like the other Buddha. He's just blue. We're looking the same as Buddha with a begging bowl of all the medicine that can heal everybody. Think this. And he's sending light from his heart with infinite wisdom, infinite love, infinite compassion. This is the meaning of the word Buddha, if we can imagine that. And that's why it's important to think of the Buddha as a person. So if you think of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, if you think he's the manifestation for us of all the Buddhas, think like that, because you can see him and you can taste him and feel him. 70 years he hasn't stopped trying to love the world and heal the world. So he's a really good example of medicine Buddha. So think the Dalai Lama, His Holiness, this amazing being, is embodying right in front of us as medicine Buddha in a blue light body, full of wisdom, full of love, full of power, only wanting to heal sentient beings. So first of all, we think that light goes out into our hearts, healing our wounded hearts, healing our craziness, healing our anger and our fears and our depression and our anxiety, healing our ignorance. And then also healing our sickness, our bodies, and healing all the people who died, that dear person who killed themselves yesterday or whatever day it was, and anybody else who's suffering this second, all the animals, all the humans living in suffering. And the Medicine Buddha sending out powerful light from his heart, healing every single one of us without exception. Really want this, want this, want this, have faith in this, have confidence. Taya taum bekanze, maha bekanze, ranza samungate, svaha. 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 So now you imagine Medicine Buddha, manifests kind of in trillions of forms and it dissolves into each one of us above our crowns. Every single one of these suffering beings, every single being in the universe, Medicine Buddha dissolves into our crown, completely taking away our pain and suffering and completely, activating our Buddha nature, activating our virtue, activating our goodness, which sometimes we can't see, but it is there and it cannot be destroyed. Delusions can be destroyed. Craziness can be destroyed. Negativity can be destroyed, but not positivity. This is something very powerful. It can never be destroyed because it's the nature of our minds. So we imagine this, all the blessings from the precious Medicine Buddha, the energy of His Holiness or whoever, whichever gurus we have, we feel their presence, blessing us, blessing us. Jang chub sem chog rinpoche ma ke panam ke guchig ke panyam pa me pa yang gong ne gong du felba shog. All right, everybody. Oh, there's our prayers. Never mind. We did them. It's enough. Thank you, darlings. Much love. Thank you so much, everybody. And I won't forget what we talked about, but maybe one of you should remember what we talked about and just remind me if I forget by next week. Okay, darlings, and we'll go. Well, so just to summarize, so we remember, we've talked a bit about, again, how to prepare our lives by thinking about impermanence and giving up attachment and understanding karma. They're the tools to use for our life. Then the time of death, this is to help others, which helps us, how it helped the weeks and months before, how to make it most conducive, most peaceful, so that virtue can manifest. And then the death process, and we haven't finished what happens yet. We haven't finished the death process. We've got to go through that part next week as well. And then how to help the days after the mind leaves the body. There's so many things to do. And Rinpoche is like so optimistic, even there's so many things we can do. So that this is what is so marvelous, So we continue all that next week. And thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much, Kataskai. Thank you, Diana, dearest Diana. Thank you, everybody. Much love. Thank you, sweethearts. See you soon. Thank you, darlings.